Hello everyone, this is PatternCos, pattern making for creators. I'm Andrea López and in this video we're showing a stay pattern, a bodice from the Regency period. It's a short bodice. This pattern has been made following a historical approach, but as you can see in the prototype photos, it can also be made using current day fabrics to wear on top of modern garments, as if it was a corset, a vest or something like that. Despite that, as I said, the pattern shape has been thought from a historical point of view of the Regency period. Let's get to it. This pattern has a lot of markings, so we're going to check the pieces. The front piece will be cut by fold line and we have two rectangles that mark the area where we have to add the chest pieces. We have two of them. They're identical, but one is a bit smaller than the other, in case you have a larger bust. You can use whichever you want. Watch that they're only larger on the upper area. That means that if you have an even larger bust, you just have to open the piece like a fan. This piece has the seam allowance included, but we see it would be placed in the marked area of the pattern. This upper and lower notch, that's towards the back, mark the position of a boning. We could translate that to the fabric, marking it with thread to have the bone visually placed. We have another notch on the upper part, which, if we go straight down, would join another notch marking the side of the garment. There's no boning here, just notches to mark the side of the garment. But if we join the upper notch with the bottom notch, that's a bit more to the front, we'll see that it marks the position of a diagonal bone. We can add a single bone or two bones right next to each other, as you prefer. On the center front, we'll also add a center bone or two parallel ones. If we wanted to make the pattern wider, same amount both on the front and the back, we'd use the side notches to cut the piece there and add the length we need. If we just wanted to widen the pattern on the front, we'd do it on the center front, and if we wanted to widen it on the back, we'd do so on the center back. Keeping in mind that these notches mark the fold so we can later finish the center back. In this position is how we'd have to widen it. As mentioned, on the center front, we'll also add a bone, one or two of them. We also have the suspender piece. It may look like it's shorter when compared to the point where it joins the body, but that's because the body piece has the seam allowance to be sewn to the front piece. If we want to make the suspender longer, we'll do so by splitting the front and back, marking where the shoulder is. Cut and add the length you want. Finally, on the center back, we have the position of the top and bottom eyelets. Depending on the size of your eyelets, we'll place more or less of them in the space in between. We can leave a gap of 2 to 3 centimeters between eyelets. As you can see, in the garment pictures, the back won't reach to the center. The pattern is made in a way that it has some tailorings so that there's a bit of separation between both sides of the bag. If you wanted them to touch, you'd have to lengthen the center back. Let's start cutting the pieces. This garment must be interfaced with a non-fusible interfacing, such as a cotton poplin. The pieces already include the seam allowance, but we could mark the real seam line on reinterfacing pieces. The brown model we're showing right now has two interfacing layers for each outer fabric piece, except for the chest pieces, which only have one interfacing layer. But the green model we could see in the pictures only has a single interfacing layer everywhere. That's up to you. It's advisable to place all three fabric layers together in the final position, meaning the outer fabric and the two interfacing layers, pasting them together and then cutting the shape. As mentioned in the beginning, these pieces, these patterns, have many markings, and it's good practice to mark it with a thread that stands out, the position of the bones, the center back fold, and all other markings. Every marking that will later help us to save the garment. Doing these things takes some effort and time, so it will depend on how much time you want to spend and the level of detail you want to achieve for the garment. As mentioned, the chest piece only has a single interfacing layer. You could also use a single layer for the suspenders too. We're going to insert the chest pieces into the front. We have to cut the center of the rectangle and stop a bit before reaching the end. To show it better, I'm going to insert the piece in a fabric scrap. To mark the position of the piece, we have to pierce those markings on the pattern. This way, we can mark them on the reverse of our fabric. Then, with a marker, we'll draw the rectangular shape. For it to be visible on the right of the fabric, we can trace the markings with thread. In the same way, we're going to mark the real seam line on the chest piece. We just have to see how much seam allowance the piece has in the attached seam allowance document. As mentioned, cut the center of the piece and stop a bit before the end. Place the chest piece right to right with the body and align the bottom corners of both pieces using pins. We'll also align the seam allowances on the top area in the same way. The chest piece seam allowance will poke from the front just because it's larger. Pass a stitching on the seam line top to bottom down to the corner. Now we'll have to make, on the end, two diagonal cuts that reach to the corners of the rectangle. This way, we'll be able to insert the chest piece through it to the inside of the garment and we'll align the other side of the seam top to bottom. Don't worry if the bottom gap is a bit narrower than it should. That's completely normal. Anyways, make it so that all the seam allowance around the chest piece in relation to the seam line to be 1.5 centimeters wide. The small flap we have now on the right of the fabric will be pushed inwards using the scissors. Press the whole piece. We could just overlock the contour and with that the piece would be finished. But another option is folding the seam allowance over itself inwards for it to be a hem. We can sew it by hand or with the machine. By hand it would not be visible from the outside, with the machine the stitching would be visible around the seam. In the prototype we're making, I'll use the hem method. But for this example, all the fabric pieces are interfaced and we'd have too many thick layers. What we should do then is shortening the seam allowance of every layer but the outermost one. And now we can make a hem that's less thick. As mentioned, this hem can be sewn by hand or with the machine, making a stitching to fix it. If we do it by hand, we can use hand sewn standard slip stitches, and we can complement it with the machine stitching, which is also a decorative effect on the right of the garment. In our pieces, we also have the boning positions marked with thread. We have to mark a rectangle with a stitching to place the bone inside. That will depend on the width of the bones used. Knowing that the positions are the ones I mentioned, make the bone container depending on the ones you'll use. Sew the front and back together by placing the pieces right to right and sewing the side seam. This seam could be overlocked, but I'll do it in the same way I did for the chest pieces. I'll cut the seam allowance short, but the outermost layer, and I'll make a hem. I'll fix this hem by hand. On the back, fold the seam allowance to make a wide hem in which we'll later place some bones and the eyelets. Like on the rest of the pieces, I'll make the end hem to have a single fabric layer. This way it will be less bulky. You may have to slightly vary the width of the hem depending on the width of your bones. The ones I'm using are half a centimeter wide. Fix the hem on one side and pass other vertical stitchings to house the bones. One right next to the hem stitching and the other right on the center back. In between them there should be enough space for the eyelets to fit. That's why I mentioned you may need to widen the width of this piece, of this hem. Sew the suspender to the back using the same kind of stitching we've used until now. Among the pattern pieces you have a rectangular one, which is just a sample so you can cut long bias cut fabric pieces, meaning that the piece will have to be at a 45-degree angle from the selvages of the fabric to bind the edges. You could also use a tape bought off the shelf from a haberdashery. Place the tape following the bottom contour of the piece, right to right, pass a stitching to fix it, and then do as usual with a bias tape. Fold it inwards and finish sewing it with a second stitching, either with a machine or by hand. Insert the bones in the center front, the diagonal on the side, and the straights on the back side and center back. Introduce them between the fabric layers, either between the two interfacing layers or between the interfacing and the outer fabric layer. From where the bone ends to the top edge, there should be 1 centimeter without boning, so that when we add the bias tape on the top, we don't step over the bonings with a sewing machine. Just like how we've added the bias tape on the bottom of the garment, we'll do the same on the top part. On the corner areas, we may need to notch a bit, so we can turn the fabric and, generally, we'll shape it with our hands. Fitting the piece to the corners and the more curved areas of the suspenders may be a bit harder, but with some patience it can be done. The garment is now finished. Earlier you saw how we have to place the eyelets on the pattern using the top and bottom ones as reference. Here on the front we'll have to add an eyelet both on the suspender and right next to the diagonal bonings. It's true that on the model we were sewing, it was straight, but on the pattern we have a curved shape, and if we fold the curved shape downwards, the pattern is now straight too, in which case we'd move the marking vertically down, but it will still have almost the same position. The eyelets are added with machines called presses. If you don't have one at home, they can add them in a shoe repair store, and in haberdasheries they sell some much more simple tools to add eyelets, although they're not as tough as the ones you can add with a press. In this kind of garments, my advice is to add them using a press. As final step, on the back, using a satin tape or a cord, we have to make the lacing. Watch how I always do the same pattern. I pass the tape from the top, from the outside to the inside, and then from the inside to the outside. out to in, and in to out. And here we're done with the sewing video. If you liked it, see you again in future pattern videos.